Hello, it's Matt. Hope you guys are doing okay. This is my second attempt at trying to record this video because, well, in my first attempt the dogs went kind of crazy, but I also wasn't really happy with how I outlined everything, so I'm going to see if I can do a little bit better job here. So this video is going to be about Stars Without Number. So my previous video about Stars Without Number was mainly just an introduction for anybody who has never played the game. And so this video, however, will kind of outline the universe that my players are operating in. So the key thing is the timeline is vastly different from what Kevin Crawford outlines in his. So in his, he's looking at year 2300 being when the players are operating in. Sorry, not 2300, 3200. 3200 is when he's operating in, which is still a long time into the future. But to put it in perspective, I mean, it's about the same distance from our time that it was when the Vikings first started getting huge, right? So it's not that long, right? So for me, in my mind, it's hard for me to grasp that the universe or the galaxy even would be that populated by then. So for my game line, I decided to look more along the lines of the Warhammer 40k universe type thing, where the timeline is much further into the future. I've given humans like plenty of time to explode, their population to explode, and because of that, I feel like I've opened up literally limitless possibilities for the players within the game. So let me go through some of the details, I guess, within, or the key features of the timeline that I've outlined, and I'll probably eventually post this if folks are interested. But I actually have a relatively detailed breakdown of when key things happen in the history of mankind leading up to when the players are playing. So the first one really is when the first spike drive is discovered. And the first spike drive is really developed in the year 4133, right? So prior to that, Earth sends different exploration ships and things like this to Alpha Centauri. That's really the main one that they try and reach out to, but it takes a long time. And they're able to develop some primitive drives that are useful leading up to it, but the key one is the spike drive. And even though in 4133 the original versions are extremely primitive themselves, they're much better than anything that's come before them. And so during this time, the only useful way to do it was to have a very talented pilot, and basically whenever you first start to drill with a spike, yeah, it's very chaotic. The chances of you arriving at your destination are slim, but they're better than the old ways of doing things, right? So as the spike drive is developed, humankind begins to expand rapidly, and this expansion is normally relatively peaceful. During this time, because the human race is expanding so fast, there are sections of the galaxy that begin to not view themselves as Earthlings anymore, right? They begin to view themselves as their own coalitions and their own colonies and their own planets, right? So they're not really looking to Earth as being a home anymore, and because of that, they start to think more independently, and they don't really answer to Earth anymore. And for the most part, the United Nations of Earth, which is the governing body on Earth, for the most part, they've been okay with this until one particular thing happens. And in the Cancia coalition, they discover what's called Grey Goo. Now I realize that there's a game called Grey Goo, and actually I picked the name just because I always thought that the name was kind of curious, but I never played the game. You guys need to tell me if the game's any good or not. But they discovered Grey Goo, and this triggers a crackdown from the UNE on how these different coalitions and these different colonies govern themselves. And so it leads to a Great War. And the Great War happens in the year 9799, about 77 years after Grey Goo is first discovered. And the Great War happens, and there's lots of death, lots of destruction within mankind and the colonies. Yeah, and basically overnight, all Grey Goo production and distribution is controlled by the UNE after the war ends. And so, yeah, so from that, the way that Grey Goo works, why is Grey Goo significant? That would be the key question here. Why is Grey Goo significant? Grey Goo essentially has healing properties past what anyone could ever imagine. So if a man or a woman, let's just say, are on their deathbed at the age of 74, well, they could take a shot of Grey Goo and live another 20 years. It has healing properties. It has anti-aging properties. Basically, as far as mankind is able to determine, someone that takes Grey Goo could literally live indefinitely if they had enough supply. And that's the key thing, is that because the UNE controls the supply of Grey Goo, these colonies and these coalitions that used to form and rely on each other, now they rely on Earth. They bend the knee to Earth. And the reason that they do that all is because of Grey Goo. And then in the year 10,383, so that's about a little over 500 years, almost 600 years after the Great War ends, Grey Goo production ceases to exist. And for the most part, the UNE was able to find a pretty steady stream of different planets that were Grey Goo producing planets. And for whatever reason, they failed to find any more. And their searches, they spent trillions of dollars, Earth dollars, credits if you want, trillions of credits trying to find Grey Goo, and they can't. And from that stems what's called the Goo Wars. So now the UNE was able to keep a pretty steady stream of goo, to the different colonies, to the different areas, the different sectors, the different governors, and keeping everybody in check, right? Because it's almost like this addiction type thing, right? So it's, keep the faith, keep doing as you're doing, and you'll keep a nice steady stream of goo coming, and you'll live forever. Well, all of a sudden, that was no longer true. So as soon as production halted, Earth essentially put all Grey Goo distribution on hold. And that's probably for obvious reasons. The rulers of Earth probably wanted to keep it for themselves, right? So anyhow, the Goo Wars happened. And long story short is that UNE was able to win the war, but once again, decades of fighting, like decades, immense military battles. Yeah, it was really a devastating thing that happened for mankind. And anyhow, Grey Goo is essentially all taken back to Earth, and it's only distributed by the ruling council on Earth. And so, for example, if for whatever reason you're a military leader and maybe you win a great battle, right, against some rebels or something like this, or you bring the war to an end, then you would probably get a nice little shot of gray goo that you could use maybe on your deathbed to give yourself a few more years, right? Or maybe you were a governor and you were able to govern your planet for, I don't know, 3 decades, right? And you kept the peace and kept a nice steady stream of taxation and currency and resources heading back to Earth. And so you were able to do a good job. Well, same thing. Here's some gray goo. So it's distributed very rarely and usually for extraordinary deeds. So, so the gray goo itself almost becomes like a myth in this time, and that's around the year 10,384, right? That's when the Goo War started, and they ended about 30 years later. So in the next big step along the timeline is the year 11,891, and during this time psionics are discovered. Now, the reason that that's important is because psionics open up another key step for humanity, which is jump gates. So prior to this, all travel was done with spike drives, and they were done without any psionics. Well, once psionics were discovered and academies were formed on Earth and they started studying it, what they figured out was that they could use psionics to jump more efficiently than just having a pilot with a spike drive. Now, what they started using is you use a psionic reader, essentially, and they read the psionic waves in the metadimensional space, and they guide the pilot. And so the pilot has a much higher success rate on the jumps. And so they expanded that to allow for jump gates. And jump gates are the only way to have intergalactic travel. So prior to this, interstellar travel was always possible, but never intergalactic travel. Now huge steps in galaxy-spanning travel were possible. And because of that, the population of humans exploded. Like almost overnight, they exploded. Because already humans were a spacefaring race. They were used to traveling in space. And by now they'd been doing it for 10,000 years, right? So they were very comfortable with space. They were very comfortable with colonizing and things like this. So in the year 12,533, the first jump gate is built. And another key aspect of the jump gate is even though jump gates are available, they're only really built in the richest the richest systems in specific sectors, and not all sectors have jump gates. So it actually can take a long time to travel between galaxies. Long time, I guess, is relative. I mean, we're talking months as opposed to millions of years, but anyhow, you kind of get my drift. The next big event that happens along the way is called the first contact, and in this case, in the Shi system, they first identified a vehicle that was not human, and this was the Ixan. The Ixan is an alien race. And they have technology that are comparable to humans in this time. And fortunately for both of the races, they establish an uneasy peace, let's just say, to begin with. And interesting enough, over the course of the relationship between humans and the Ixan, they have no real major wars. Now, there's always some scuffle, or maybe like a rogue general or something, decides to wage his own little war and might raid a human settlement or something like that. But for the most part, peace is able to be kept between the two races. And after about a millennia of peace, which is 1,000 years, the two star nations form an alliance, and they basically become their own small coalition. Then in the year 21,936, the second contact happens. And this one was not a contact that the humans made, but rather the Ixon. In one of the fringe Ixon planets, sectors, they started receiving information that there was a new alien race that was being discovered. And this was basically far, far from the human space, which was fortunate for the humans because the Athalid swarm was discovered by the Ixon. And basically, the Athalid swarm, the best way that I can probably describe it is some kind of the Zerg is comes to mind for sure. Basically, an all-consuming race. They there's really not much information surrounding them, but basically they consume all life forms, all sentient life forms, and they seem to have a knack for trying to colonize themselves. So there's really no parlay with them. They don't try to reach out and speak with any of the other alien races. They just consume. And so, fortunately, though, the UNE, they mobilized half of their military might to assist their allies. And by the time that they were able to turn the Athalid swarm back, an entire third of the Ixon population was destroyed. And so from this, the two Ixon, both Ixon and the UNE, formed the Guardian Coalition, is what they decided to call themselves. And they agreed to unite as a single galactic nation. So no longer was the UNE a thing so much as the Guardian Coalition. In the year 26,318, by now, the Athalid swarm is still existent, but they sort of operate as a fringe, troublesome nuisance that sometimes sends patrols and sometimes sends raiding parties for food, right? And you can kind of draw your own conclusions on how they get the food. But for the most part, the Athalid swarm has been relatively quiet. And then in 26,318, there's a third contact, which are the Kikiel. The Kikiel is a robot alien race that comes to find out that they have created their own sort of like utopia, mechanical utopia, and they are quote unquote friendly. And the reason I say quote unquote friendly is because they actively send missionaries and different things to both the Ixon and the humans, trying to convince them to join their race as cyborgs. And I haven't really sorted out all the details on that yet, because for me, these guys are a pretty minor part of the story so far within my game. But yeah, I'm kind of interested to explore and see how that will, what kind of new things we might discover with the Kikiel. 27,896. The most important event in the entire storyline happens. 27,896. The scream occurs. And so basically it's the same, it's similar to how Kevin Crawford outlines it within his recommendation for the history of the game. All psionics are either killed or instantly driven insane. One thing that I've changed is that all communication with the home worlds are lost. So basically anything that may happen, basically anything that you could still communicate maybe with neighboring systems if you were fortunate enough, but for the most part, communication comes to a complete halt because by this time, psionics have driven everything, and so a lot of the old ways of communicating were lost. That old technology that was primitive but still kind of worked, yeah, humans have kind of shed that. Humans and the Ixon have shed that as alternatives. And so all because psionics as well, because psionics have been driven insane and died off, space travel itself becomes grounds to a halt. Where where pilots used to be trained on how to travel without psionic guides, no longer is that true. And so the trade comes to a halt, interstellar trade, intergalactic trade, all travel comes to a halt. So you have all of these hive worlds that rely on resources from all these other worlds. All of a sudden, they have no more resources, right? So you can kind of imagine some of the horrors that went on with this. And my goal is to eventually let the players explore this. But yeah, we'll have to see what all comes about. But the logistical disruptions, yeah, I think that's going to be a key thing for how the storyline kind of plays out for my players whenever they go through. I'm really interested to see what all they stumble across. It's easy to say that with this, billions of people dying is too small of a number from this happening. I mean, we're talking, like, by now, mankind has expanded at a rate that you can't even imagine, right? So we're talking maybe even trillions of people have die from this event. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So that finally leads us to present day. Present day in the game is the year 29,000 even. The players, I guess this one's went pretty long, but I'll have to kind of explain where they're at now and kind of what their goal is. But this video was primarily an effort by me to try and outline and get my own thought process around my world, and also maybe share it with you. So, yeah, that's some of the key aspects within the universe that we're playing in. I hope you found some of it interesting. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. If you've stuck around this long, I guess maybe you did. And also, if you've stuck around this long, go ahead and give me a like, give me a subscribe. I've got more videos coming, I'm sure, for this stuff. And yeah, appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys have a good time. Have a good day. Have a safe week. Wish the best for you guys. We'll see you on the next one.